We begin with a further escalation in Israel's military campaign against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says Israeli troops are now operating in the heart of Gaza City. He has called Gaza the largest terrorist base ever built. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned there will be no fuel deliveries until Hamas releases the more than 200 hostages it captured on October 7th. Here's what Netanyahu had to say.
The fighting in the south is advancing with a force that Hamas hasn't known. Gaza City is encircled. We are operating in it and deepening the pressure on Hamas every hour, every day. So far, we have killed thousands of terrorists above the ground and under the ground. There will be no entry of fuel, no entry of workers, and there will be no ceasefire without the release of our hostages.
For the latest, let's cross over to DW Special Correspondent Ibrahim in Jerusalem. What are you hearing from the Israel Defense Forces about the difficulty of their operation in and around Gaza City?
We know that so far 30 Israeli soldiers have been killed since the beginning of the ground operation about a week ago. And as the ground operation enters into its next phase, we can expect this death toll to rise as well. So far, close combat, urban warfare has been limited to urban areas. But as you just mentioned, Israeli troops are now inside Gaza City. This is previously one of the most populated parts of the entire strip, and also where the Israeli military believes the largest concentration of Hamas's tunnel system is located right underneath Gaza City. So as this phase moves forward, we can expect more close combat with Hamas militants. We can expect more urban warfare as Israeli troops try to rid the strip of Hamas, and also to attempt to release the hostages, the majority of whom are still believed to be within the strip. We can also expect that with urban warfare, civilian casualties will also rise. The Israeli military has repeatedly asked Gazans to evacuate to the south. There are many reasons why about 300,000 still remain there. Either they're worried that there's no safe place, or as they say, they are not able to evacuate. This is something that really touches almost everyone in Israeli society. This is a country where military service is mandatory with very, very few exceptions, and over 300 reservists have been called up. So it's the effect of this ground operation and this war is something that you see everywhere here in Israel.
So the war has been going on now for over a month. Are Israelis satisfied, with the way their government is prosecuting this war?
I would say there's pretty much overwhelming support for the war, even though, as I just mentioned, it will come at a huge cost. People here are acutely aware of that. But at the same time, what they tell me is that they feel like there is no choice. This is the only way, this war is the only way to, first of all, regain their security, get rid of Hamas as the government wants to do. And they feel this could also bring back the hostages. There is, however, mounting anger at the government and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu specifically. We just crossed the 1 month mark since the terror attacks of October 7th here in Jerusalem and elsewhere in the country. There were vigils, memorials that also turned into protests against the Prime Minister, who has so far not taken responsibility for the major security lapse that was October 7th. So I would say support for the war effort, but at the same time, mounting anger at the government and Prime Minister Netanyahu, even though it is a unity government that also has opposition figures.
Thank you very much. Our special correspondent, Ibrahim in Jerusalem. Now, Israel says it is entering the next stage of its war against Hamas, whose fighters are reportedly operating from a large network of tunnels. Israel says militants are launching mortar attacks against Israeli soldiers and then retreating back underground. It's a challenging situation for Israeli forces. Let's have a closer look now at the options that Israeli forces may be considering in this next phase with our military expert, Frank Ledwidge. Frank, the tunnel system used by Hamas militants has been described as a spider web by a former hostage. Can you help us better imagine, Frank, what that looks like and how long this might have taken to build?
Good morning, Terry. Yes, in Gaza, actually, it's called the Gaza Metro as well, and that describes to some extent the complexity of it. It's been built for about 20 years. Hamas started constructing these in the early 2000s, although some say a bit earlier. And the extent is truly vast. Most estimates put it at around, throughout the enclave, at around 300 miles or 500 kilometres long, although clearly some of those systems are more formidable, deeper and bigger than others. Connected, of course, with bunkers, where you have command centres and what have you. And the countermeasures to be used against them are many, but this is a very difficult challenge. You'll be attacking them from the air, from the land, and indeed from the sea.
Now, Israel has tasked a special unit, one of its special units, with finding out more about the location and layout of these tunnels. Frank, how would they go about doing that?
They have no one particular method, needless to say. So the unit is called Yahalom. It's part of the engineering corps, but it's considered a special forces unit. It's extremely selective, and as you can imagine, very, very highly skilled. And they've been going for it again for quite some time, and the options available to them are certainly not primarily them going into tunnels and shooting people. That would be the very last option, and probably an option certainly very rarely used. The US used such troops in Vietnam called tunnel rats, and these guys would be similar in concept but not in execution. You won't be seeing them very often underground. So the weapons that they have include but aren't limited to, or means, they literally smoking out tunnels. So you put inert smoke in and you can see where the entrance and exits are. It's very difficult to counter that. And then, of course, once you've found those, you need to seal them. And there are a number of ways of doing that. First is through high explosives. Simply seal the entrances and collapse the tunnels. And the second, another one, there are several, emulsion. There's an emulsion system. It's called a sponge bomb, where you, which can work along a certain length of tunnels. It simply seals it up. You have two compounds, they come together and they expand and seal the tunnel. But there are other means being looked at. I mentioned the sea before. One very innovative means that is being considered is, should be a bit nightmarish for Hamas, is once you've cleared the tunnels, in other words, you know a particular tunnel is clear of certainly of hostages, they're considering things like horizontal drilling from the sea and considering things like flooding. So the options are many, but do not generally include these guys going underground and shooting people. They're much too easy to defend. They'd be full of booby traps. And, of course, most importantly, the tunnels are where the hostage and bunkers are where the hostages are. And then, of course, there's attack from the air, and we've seen that already.
Speaking of attack from the air, Israel obviously wants to destroy both the tunnels and eliminate Hamas fighters. From the air, so-called bunker buster bombs can be dropped. We've seen those used in other wars in the past. Are we likely to see them used in this case, Frank?
Well, Terry, I think we have seen them used. I've seen some evidence that they have been used already. There are several different kinds. The primary kind is called a GBU guided bomb unit. It's a precision bomb, very thin, GBU 23, I think. Now, that's about 2.5 tons of explosives and bomb. That can penetrate, some say, up to about 50 meters. And it's worth saying that Hamas's tunnels are generally regarded as being that deep. And they would be used to collapse the tunnel. So they can penetrate earth at least to 50 meters, but also concrete. And I've been in bunkers in Iraq and Lebanon, and indeed as a tourist in Vietnam. But a lot of these bunkers are lined with concrete. So what these bombs will allow you to do is not only get deep, but also penetrate the concrete to a certain depth. And there are even bigger bombs that have been designed for Iran. I very much doubt we'll see those. You saw one being used in Afghanistan a few years, which was popularly known as the mother of all bombs. We won't see that. But the average or common or garden bunker bombs used since the early 90s. It's roughly the same version. We will be seeing those, and we have seen them.
Well, of course, we know that Hamas is holding more than 200 hostages, probably somewhere in that tunnel system. Given that, how problematic is it for Israeli forces to be using those kinds of weapons that you described, Frank?
Yeah, that's the top consideration on their list. And when you hear or read Israelis speak about the vital importance of clearing any particular system, which is to say understanding and being sure that hostages aren't there, is utterly paramount. Now, the Israelis have already collapsed many of these tunnels. And by the way, those bombs I talked to you about, they're supplemented with all kinds of artillery systems. And, of course, the Yahalom unit, also comprised, by the way, of dogs. They've got specially trained dogs. But anyway, coming back to the hostages, the problem is that you can use those things, but they have a lateral spread of about half a mile. So you put one of the bombs in, go deep, it will collapse your tunnel for about a kilometre. Now, the Israelis have discovered many tunnel systems, and they do that through means from all kinds of means, like, again, land, sea and air. But one means is through human intelligence. That's probably in my view anyway, the most important. And the Israelis have discovered tunnel maps and what have you. And those are the systems I think that have been collapsed so far. But as Israeli troops get further into Gaza City, the tunnel systems are going to be a real problem. And they'll be extremely, well, they won't clear any until they're sure no hostages are there. This is the number one priority. But from the safety of the Israeli troops' perspective, you've already seen videos of this, where Hamas fighters have shown videos allegedly showing destroying tanks. They haven't. The tanks systems will have prevented that. But the problem is that what you do see is you see these fighters emerging from behind, from the side, from in front. And this is why, of course, the tunnel systems is Hamas's main combat weapon, apart from civilians, of course. One final thing worth mentioning. It's been described to me as common knowledge. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean much, but you mentioned it in the report, that many of the headquarters are located under hospitals. I'm certain that's the case. And entries and exits in places like mosques or schools or UN, some say UN facilities. And that's the problem. And that's why we've seen, I think, so many non-combatant casualties so far, because Israelis have to hit these systems, many of which are command centres, and they are located in such places. Not just the hostages, of course. Another consideration is the civilian casualties. And the tunnels are, of course, and bunkers are placed underneath these installations or these places.
Frank, thank you very much. That was military analyst Frank Ledwidge there speaking to us from Oxford in the UK.
Thanks, Terry.